He redefined American glamour, built a fashion empire worth hundreds of millions, and dressed icons like Jackie Kennedy and Elizabeth Taylor. Then he sold his name to a corporate giant and spiraled into addiction, chaos, and exile from the very brand he created. Imagine being so high on success and something else that you redesigned entire collections overnight, only to wake up with no memory of what you'd created. This is the story of Roy Halston Frowick, the small-town kid from Iowa who conquered New York, revolutionized fashion with a single piece of fabric, and turned Studio 54 into his runway, only to lose it all. A genius who made luxury effortless. A man whose greatest talent was matched only by his self-destruction. Welcome to the wild, beautiful, and tragic rise and fall of Halston, perhaps the most reckless fashion brand in American history. Roy Halston Frowick didn't start as a fashion revolutionary. Born in 1932 in Des Moines, Iowa, he was just another Midwestern boy with big dreams and bigger ambition. But even as a child, he stood out. While other kids played baseball, Halston was sketching dresses and crafting hats for his mother and sister. "I always knew I was meant for something more than Iowa," he once said. "I just didn't know what that something was until I touched my first piece of silk." In 1957, Halston moved to New York and landed a job in the millinery salon at Bergdorf Goodman. This wasn't just any hat shop. It was a shrine for Manhattan's elite. His designs weren't frilly or old-fashioned. They were sleek, sculptural, and distinctly modern, signaling a shift in American style. Halston understood something others didn't. American women didn't want to imitate European royalty. They wanted to look like themselves, elegant, powerful, and effortless. His work gave them exactly that. His big break came in 1961, when Jacqueline Kennedy wore one of his pillbox hats to her husband's presidential inauguration. The powder blue hat became an instant icon, catapulting Halston to national fame. What made it unforgettable, though, was a flaw, a small dent created when Jackie adjusted it during the windy ceremony. Fashion magazines published the photo, and suddenly every milliner in the country was copying that dent, believing it was intentional. Halston later laughed it off. They thought it was part of the design. But the moment taught him something lasting. Perfection isn't always what captivates. Sometimes, it's the unexpected. That lesson would shape his vision for years to come. By the late 1960s, Halston had outgrown the world of hats. He launched his namesake fashion label in 1968, bringing with him a vision that would redefine American style. While European designers built garments with rigid structure and formality, Halston did the opposite. He made clothes that moved, breathed, and lived on the body. His secret weapon was Ultrasuede, a synthetic material originally developed for car interiors. Most designers dismissed it. Halston turned it into high fashion. His famous shirtdress, cut from a single piece of Ultrasuede, was washable, durable, and effortlessly elegant. It was a revolution, luxury that was both glamorous and practical. He stripped away the fuss of fashion and replaced it with clean lines, fluid silhouettes, and a sense of ease. His clothes didn't just fit, they flowed. They didn't just look expensive, they looked natural. Halston wasn't designing for fantasy. He was designing for a new kind of woman, modern, independent, and unapologetically American. The industry noticed. In 1973, he was chosen to represent the United States at the Battle of Versailles, a high-stakes fashion showdown between American and French designers. The French came armed with theatrics and tradition. Halston brought grace and modernity. His models didn't walk, they danced. Pat Cleveland, Alva Chin, Bethan Hardison. They weren't mannequins, they were stars, and Halston's designs let them shine. "We weren't copying Paris anymore," Hardison later said. "We had our own rhythm, our own voice." By the mid-1970s, Halston wasn't just a designer. He was a phenomenon. His name was on magazine covers, boutique doors, and the backs of the most photographed women in the world. And behind the scenes, the pressure and the temptations were only growing. In 1977, New York nightlife changed forever. Studio 54 opened its doors, and Halston walked in like he owned the place. For him, it wasn't just a club. It was a second home, a stage, a laboratory, and a trap. Every night after finishing work at his Olympic Tower atelier, he'd arrive just past midnight. At his regular table, surrounded by his Halstonettes, a dazzling mix of models, celebrities, and socialites, he held court while the music thumped and the flashbulbs popped. Studio 54 was wild, and so was Halston. There were no rules. Champagne poured freely. So did the drugs. Friends described him sketching dresses between lines of cocaine, convinced his ideas were divine inspiration. Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But he had lost the ability, or the will, to tell the difference. Amid the chaos was Victor Hugo, a Venezuelan window dresser who became Halston's boyfriend and constant companion. Charismatic and dangerous, Hugo fed Halston's ego, his cravings, and eventually, his paranoia. He had no experience in fashion, but Halston gave him power anyway. Creative input, business access, and a front-row seat to the empire's unraveling. Victor was beautiful and completely useless, Andre Leon Talley would later say, but Halston couldn't let him go. The excess was staggering. Halston spent $150,000 a year on orchids. He traveled with a personal entourage, had homes in multiple cities, and maintained a lifestyle as extravagant as the women he dressed. But while he was partying, his business was drifting. Meetings were missed, deadlines slipped, decisions were made under the influence. The empire that Halston built was starting to show cracks, and he either didn't see them or refused to care. By 1983, Halston's empire was glittering on the surface and crumbling underneath. His extravagant lifestyle had created a cash flow crisis. Despite dressing the world's most glamorous women and heading a brand valued in the millions, he was burning through money faster than he could make it. He needed a lifeline. And he thought he found one in Norton Simon Industries, a sprawling conglomerate with interests in everything from cosmetics to ketchup. They offered $16 million to acquire Halston Limited. The deal gave him financial stability and kept him on as creative director. But it came with a hidden cost: his name. Halston had sold it. He believed he was gaining support, structure, and freedom to focus purely on design. What he didn't realize, or refused to believe, was that he had just signed away control of his brand's most valuable asset, himself. The problem started quickly. Norton Simon's executives knew consumer goods, not couture. They pushed for rapid expansion, lower prices, and broader accessibility. Their vision for Halston was volume: department store deals, licensing agreements, diffusion lines. Prestige was no longer the point. Profit was. Then came the JCPenney deal. In 1983, Halston signed on to create Halston 3, a budget-friendly line for the mass market chain. For him, it was an opportunity to bring good design to everyday shoppers. For luxury retailers, it was a betrayal. Bergdorf Goodman, his longtime retail partner, immediately dropped him. Others followed. "If you're going to sell to JCPenney," said Bergdorf's president, "don't sell to me." The fashion world recoiled. His elite clientele felt alienated, and the JCPenney line, poorly executed with cheap fabrics and inconsistent sizing, only made things worse. What was meant to expand the brand instead diluted it. Halston went from symbol of luxury to cautionary tale, almost overnight. The damage was done, and Halston had just begun to lose everything. The JCPenney deal didn't just damage Halston's brand, it blew it apart. What was once the epitome of American luxury suddenly looked cheap. And not just cheap in price, cheap in spirit. Ask yourself this: what happens when a designer who built his reputation on exclusivity starts selling in the same stores where you buy socks and towels? That's exactly what luxury retailers asked. Their answer? They walked away. As the Halston label lost its cachet, the man behind it was unraveling. The parties got heavier, the drug use more constant, and his inner circle more dangerous. At the center of that chaos was Victor Hugo, Halston's lover, live-in companion, and eventually, the person who would do the most damage. By the mid-'80s, Hugo was stealing from him, selling off art, forging checks, even claiming credit for Halston's designs. And when Halston finally realized what was happening, Hugo vanished. Gone, along with hundreds of thousands of dollars, and whatever trust Halston had left. That betrayal changed him. The confidence, the charisma, the charm, it all faded. Friends described him as withdrawn, suspicious, distant. Meanwhile, the business he'd built was falling apart, and Norton Simon Industries, the conglomerate that now owned his brand, was losing patience. You want numbers? Let's talk numbers. At its peak, Halston Limited was valued at over $100 million, an impressive number for the time. He had fragrance deals, boutiques in fashion capitals, and licensing agreements across multiple industries. But by 1984, sales were nosediving. High-end stores had dropped him. The JCPenney line flopped, and the licensing that once seemed genius had backfired, flooding the market with cheap goods and destroying the brand's mystique. So what did the company do? They fired him. Think about that for a second. You build an empire. You make your name synonymous with modern American style. And then one day you're told, you can't design under your own name anymore. You can't sketch. You can't launch. You can't even call yourself Halston in a professional setting. That's not just a corporate firing. That's an execution. He fought back, lawsuits, countersuits, trying to regain control. But it was too late. The boardroom owned the brand now, not the man. And the fashion world? It had already moved on. So there he was, Roy Halston Frowick, a pioneer who had dressed presidents and movie stars, now legally gagged from creating. For 6 years, he watched other people control everything he built: his name, his legacy, his aesthetic. What would you do if someone took your life's work, put it on discount racks, and told you to stay quiet? That's the question Halston had to live with. By 1990, Halston had regained limited rights to use his name, but it was a hollow victory. The fashion world had changed, and it had moved on without him. The sleek minimalism he once pioneered was now owned by others: Calvin Klein, Donna Karan, Giorgio Armani. The moment Halston had once dominated was now just a memory. He tried to stage a comeback. A small collection for Bergdorf Goodman was met with polite indifference. A licensing deal for accessories fizzled out. The name still held weight, but the magic was gone. Halston was no longer a tastemaker. He was a relic, familiar, but no longer essential. Worse, his health was failing. Years of substance abuse had taken their toll, and in 1988 he was diagnosed with HIV. He kept the illness private, retreating further from the public eye. Friends noticed the weight loss, the fatigue, the gradual disappearance from the social scene he once ruled. On March 26, 1990, Halston died of complications from AIDS-related cancer. He was 57 years old. The man who once reigned over Manhattan from Studio 54 to 7th Avenue died quietly in San Francisco, far from the spotlight he had once commanded. His death marked the end of an era, said Vogue editor Anna Wintour. Halston was part of a time when fashion was about fantasy, charisma, and spectacle. After him, fashion became more corporate, more calculated. Something went missing. What went missing was Halston himself, not just the designer, but the energy, the seduction, the confidence he brought to everything he touched. He hadn't just created clothes. He created a mood, a feeling. And once he was gone, no one else could recreate it. More than 3 decades after his death, Halston's name still lingers in fashion, but as much a warning as a legacy. His innovations reshaped American style. The embrace of synthetic fabrics, the emphasis on comfort, and the seamless fusion of minimalism and glamour. He made high fashion feel effortless and accessible long before it became the industry norm. But Halston's story is also a study in extremes. He was a visionary who understood women, fabric, and movement like few others. Yet he was also a man who let fame blind him, who lost control of his brand, and who allowed indulgence to drown discipline. Halston was incredibly talented, but also incredibly reckless, said fashion law expert Susan Scafidi. He made brilliant creative decisions and catastrophic business ones, sometimes in the same hour. Since his death, the Halston brand has been revived multiple times. Celebrities have worn his name, Designers have tried to channel his style, and corporate teams have marketed his legacy. But none have captured the essence of the original. The charisma, the flair, the precision. That was Halston. And Halston cannot be franchised. In 2021, Netflix's miniseries starring Ewan McGregor reignited interest in his life, introducing him to a new generation. But even that glossy retelling couldn't bottle what made Halston unforgettable. "You can own the name," said fashion historian Hamish Bowles, "but you can't license the mystique." In the end, Halston's greatest creation wasn't a dress or a perfume or even a brand. It was an idea that luxury could be modern, fluid, and unmistakably American. And his greatest failure was letting others take that idea and sell it without him. He could have been the American Chanel. Instead, he became a beautiful, tragic, and uniquely American cautionary tale. So what do you think? Was Halston a visionary undone by the system, or the architect of his own collapse? Could his empire have been saved, or was its destruction the inevitable price of genius? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into fashion history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next week as we explore another legend who lit up the industry. And some burned out just as fast.